The footpath that everyone forgot.
The rain had stopped in the night, and the morning came up clean over Little Mizzlewick, smelling of wet stone and cut grass. Nora Field took her usual way past the churchyard, past the dripping yews and the low wall where the moss kept it together. St Jude's stood square against the cobbled square, as it always had. Everything was where she had left it, except the path. Behind the church, where the old footpath ran down toward the lower lane and the bridge, something had changed. For years that path had been a suggestion rather than a route, a green tangle that caught at your sleeve and gave up halfway. Now the brambles were cut back, blunt and tidy, as though someone had lost patience with being scratched. A dark, dry layer of wood chip lay over the patch that turned to soup every spring. The gate, which had hung at its tired angle for as long as anyone could remember, stood straight on its hinges. Nora slowed. A blackbird worked at something in the hedge and said nothing useful. She knew the sound of that gate the way she knew the church clock. You lifted the latch and it shrieked, a thin metal complaint that carried half across the green. She had heard it 10,000 times. She lifted it now, ready for the shriek, and there was none. The latch rose under her thumb, silent and easy, and the gate swung and settled and closed with a small, clean click she did not recognise at all. For a moment she simply stood with her hand on the cool metal. Someone had done this. That was plain. What was not plain was who, or when, or why. Nobody had said a word. There must have been a meeting, surely. Nora had kept the notice board at St Jude's for 30 years, and she was as certain as she was of anything that she would remember a meeting, because meetings contained biscuits, and a damp church hall, and at least one disagreement about parking. There had been no biscuits. There had been no notice pinned to her board. There had been nothing at all. And then there had been a mended path. She walked down it slowly, listening to her own boots on the wood chip, and could not say why it troubled her. Word of the path moved through the village the way most things did, by the shop, by the post office, by the long pause people take before they say what they really think. Sarah Logan was delighted. A community project, she decided, and wondered aloud who she ought to thank, while she weighed out flour and got it slightly wrong. June Marsh was not delighted. June came to find Nora by the wall, with her arms folded and her opinion already prepared. "Wood chip," she said in the tone other people reserve for damp. "It keeps the mud down," Nora offered. "I can see what it does," said June. "I am objecting to the principle. 1 minute a person cuts back a bramble because it has attached itself to her sleeve with malicious intent, and the next thing you know, someone has carpeted the path like a municipal picnic area. You cut back the bramble." "1 bramble," said June. "A personal matter between me and the bramble. I did not reopen a public right-of-way." Nora looked past her, down the newly passable path where the wood chip lay dark and dry over the worst of the mud. "Then who put that down?" "Exactly," said June with satisfaction. "Somebody has decided something. I should like to know who and on whose say-so." That was the trouble when Nora turned it over. Not the path itself, which was a small good thing. It was the deciding, or rather, the lack of any visible deciding. A bramble cut here. A branch moved there. Wood chip laid where the mud was worst. The village seemed to have improved itself while everyone was looking the other way. Gavin Price, asked outright in the lane, said he had not organised anything, which was true. Then he went rather quiet when the gate latch came up, which was also true, in its way. The mild war of the wood chip might have run for a week, except that cinders settled it. The marmalade cat arrived at his own pace, as he arrived everywhere, the station being merely the place he kept his things. He walked the length of the new path with the air of an inspector, sat down precisely in the middle of it, and arranged his tale. June, mid-sentence about permission and proper channels, found her route blocked by a solid mound of orange complacency. She stepped around him with the great dignity of a woman pretending she had meant to go that way, and Cinders watched her do it, and did not move so much as a whisker. Reverend B came by as the laughter settled, on her way from somewhere to somewhere, as vicars always are. "I moved a branch," she admitted when asked. After evensong, it had fallen, and I disliked stepping over it in the dark. That hardly counts as path mending. She looked down the cleared run toward the bridge. Sometimes a path comes back, she said, because people are ready to walk it again. Nora heard the words. She did not yet hear the meaning. The next evening, Nora walked the path on purpose, meaning to settle it. If there was an organiser, the path would tell her. Paths did, if you read them properly. She read it carefully. One bramble had been cut through with a single clean stroke, the kind you make when a thorn has caught your good coat and you have a knife in your pocket and a moment to spare. The branch the Reverend had moved lay tidy against the wall, set down with thought rather than thrown. The wood chip stopped exactly where the mud had been worst, and not an inch beyond. Whoever had laid it had not been decorating. They had been solving a problem. The latch had been eased and oiled by a hand that understood hinges. Each sign pointed somewhere. None of them pointed to the same place. Nora tried to gather them into one person and could not. She tried Gavin, but Gavin had only touched the gate. She tried June, but June had only cut back one bramble and treated it as a private quarrel. She tried Bay, who had only lifted a branch and refused to be thanked for it. The small painted sign at the turning, pointing the way to the bridge in someone's careful capitals, had no signature at all, and the longer she looked at it, the more she felt that the lack was not an oversight. It was simply that whoever made it had not thought a name was the point. There was nobody to write down. That was the thing that unsettled her, walking in the thickening birdsong with the light going gold over the stream. She had spent 30 years recording who did what, so the village would remember its own kindnesses. Here was a kindness with no author to record. The path dropped toward the lower lane, and her feet knew it before her mind did. She and June had walked this way as girls, when the gate still shrieked, and neither of them minded. 40 years and more. She had forgotten, in the way you forget a thing that is simply always there. June had cut back the bramble, then pretended it was only a private quarrel with a thorny branch. That was June all over, Nora thought. Useful, unsentimental, and allergic to being thanked. The gate clicked clean behind her. Nora stood on the bridge a while and did not try to solve anything else. It came out the way true things tend to, sideways, over other business. Gavin was the last piece, and he gave it up grudgingly, the way a man hands over a secret he does not think is interesting. Nora found him with his head in someone's bonnet outside the pub and asked him straight about the latch. It was shrieking, he said, as though that explained itself. He wiped his hands. A gate should close properly if people are going to use it. That's all. He went back to the car. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. So there had been no organiser, no project, no committee with a name and a budget. There had only been a handful of people who each saw one awkward thing and quietly put it right, none of them thinking it counted for much, none of them imagining the others were doing the same. A cut bramble, a moved branch, a dry place to step, a gate that closed, a sign with no name pointing the way for whoever came next. Sarah wanted to make a notice. Something for the board, she said, thanking the volunteers. Nora, who had kept that board for 30 years and never once left a kindness unrecorded, surprised herself. Leave it, she said gently. Leave it as it is. Because some things did not want a name pinned to them, June admitted with the air of conceding a great deal, that whoever had put down the wood chip had at least stopped half the village treading mud into the hall, and that this was, on balance, acceptable. Nobody cut a ribbon, nobody gave a speech. The path simply went on being a path and people began to use it. And that was the entire ceremony. On the last of the light, Nora walked it once more. Cinders had taken up his position on the gatepost, surveying the lane below with the satisfaction of a creature who feels the world has finally been arranged to his liking. She let herself through. The latch rose silent under her thumb. The gate swung and settled and closed behind her with one small, clean click. Care did not always arrive with a name attached. Sometimes it was a clipped bramble and a dry place to step, and nobody making a fuss, and a path that simply came back because the village was ready to walk it again. Nora left it off the board and walked home lighter than she had come.